Hi, I'm Jeff Mucklin, and this is Science at Home, brought to you by the Nurture Nature Center. I'm going to turn up the temperature in this episode because we're going to be talking about extreme heat. Now, right now, it's over 80 degrees up here, and it's pretty unbearable because it's also very muggy today, but it can and does get a lot hotter than that here in Easton every summer. The highest temperature ever recorded in the Lehigh Valley was 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and that occurred on July 23rd, 2011. Now that's dangerously hot, but there are places on Earth that regularly get even hotter. Generally, the closer one gets to the equator, the hotter it gets. There are other factors that affect average temperature, like being at low elevations or being far from the cooling influence of the oceans. Here we see global monthly average temperatures over the entire Earth. Red areas are hotter. This scale goes up to 122 degrees Fahrenheit, and blue areas are colder, with this scale going down to minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Near the equator, which is this line right here, it gets hotter during some parts of the year than others, but it never really gets cold, not by our standards anyway. This is due to the Earth's tilt, causing the northern and southern hemispheres to experience dramatic changes in the amount of sunlight they receive. This is why our hottest days are in July, when we're still getting lots of extra daylight after the summer solstice, which occurs in late June. You might wonder why the hottest days of the year are not normally in the few days before and after the solstice. Well, this is just due to the fact that the Earth's surface and atmosphere is a very large system. And so it takes it time for it to heat up or cool down. That's not the only factor, though. Near the equator, at high elevations, it can still get extremely cold. Here in the Andes Mountains, you can see it's pretty cold. In fact, there are glaciers not that far from the equator up in the Andes Mountains. These cold mountainous regions, though, are the exception. Now, as we get closer to sea level, we feel the full force of the sun's energy as the thicker layers of the atmosphere at lower levels act like a blanket, holding in the heat. There are some places that are cooled by ocean currents, particularly in places where there are cold water currents that bring colder water from further north towards the equator or from south towards the equator. And there are also places where there are upwellings that bring cold water from deep beneath the surface of the ocean up to the surface. These cold regions at the surface of the ocean kind of cool the air above them, sometimes over a very large area. A good example of this would be a La Nina. During an El Nino, it gets a little bit warmer at the equator, but during a La Nina year, winds are stronger at the equator, and this causes upwelling off the coast of South America. And that causes a large area of the Pacific Ocean near here to cool off. So the hottest places are going to be near the equator, at low elevations, and far from cold sea surfaces. In the United States, the places where these conditions come together are in Southern California, Arizona, and New Mexico. These are places in the United States that have the highest temperatures. And indeed, the hottest air temperature ever recorded in the entire world was in the United States at a blistering 134 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm sure it was fine. I heard it was a dry heat. Joking aside, that is a really high temperature. That is dangerously hot. It was recorded in Death Valley, California, at the aptly named Furnace Creek on July 10th, 1913. The site also holds the highest temperature ever recorded on a natural surface on the Earth. On July 15th, 1972, the ground surface temperature reached 201 degrees Fahrenheit. In our area, the highest temperatures are associated with high pressure systems that can trap air. This results in low wind speeds, which makes it even harder for our bodies to cool off outside. And it also allows the air temperature to rise to uncharacteristically high levels. Here at the Nurture Nature Center, we actually have a weather station on the roof of the building. But if you go to Weather Underground, in addition to being able to see current weather conditions, you can look at the archive of data that we've been recording since we installed this weather station several years ago. And right now I've pulled up July 20th and July 26th of 2020. It was a very hot time. That's not surprising. We usually have our hottest time period in late July, and this was no exception. It was a very hot week. And if you look at the data, you can see that there definitely is a correlation between the highest temperature days and the air pressure. Tended to be higher on those days, and the wind speed tended to be lower. If these weather conditions don't change, if that high pressure system sticks around for several days in a row, we may experience a heat wave like we did in the week of the 20th of last year. In our area, high heat is also normally accompanied by high humidity. Humidity is just a measure of how much moisture is in the air. Humid air feels hotter and more unbearable, partly because it short circuits our most effective method of staying cool. Sweating allows our bodies to cool. Here I've set up a little experiment where I have two different rags, one that I've soaked with water and one that's completely dry. If I measure the temperature of both of these rags, you might not be surprised to find that the wet rag is cooler. This one is 65 degrees and the dry rag is 78 degrees. But it gets even cooler if I blow air over the wet rag. Moving air encourages evaporation, and again, as water evaporates from this wet rag, it cools it down. So with the fan blowing, this rag has now cooled down already to 64 degrees. Prolonged exposure to high temperatures can lead to heat stroke, which can lead to death or permanent injury if treatment is not given. The stress of extreme heat can worsen underlying conditions such as cardiovascular disease and respiratory problems. During an extreme heat event, there are things that you can do to reduce your heat stress. Avoid strenuous outdoor activity. Avoid being outside during the hottest part of the day. Dress in light, breathable clothing, preferably that reflects sunlight and heat away from the body. Avoid exposure to sunlight. Find shade. Drink plenty of water and eat light, easy-to-digest meals like salads and fruit. You can cool down by resting in an air-conditioned space or in front of a fan or mister. Taking a cold shower or a swim can quickly reduce your heat stress. Make sure to check in on others during extreme heat. Unfortunately, we can expect more extreme weather due to the effects of climate change. The urban environment makes us hotter too. Cities are paved with dark roads and they're covered with dark roofs. Brick and stone buildings absorb heat and they radiate it to their surroundings. On average, cities are about 7 degrees warmer than nearby forested regions. This phenomenon is called the urban heat island effect, and it only adds to the danger of hot weather. Here are two tiles that are otherwise identical, except for the fact that one is white and the other is black. The color of these tiles makes a huge difference in how hot they get. The white tile is presently 78 degrees, whereas the black tile is 83 degrees. If we encourage people to coat the roofs of their buildings in lighter colored materials, it will make our cities cooler. It will reduce the urban heat island effect. It will also save energy for the people who own those buildings, by the way. They'll have to pay less to cool down their buildings. We can also cool our cities by having more green spaces within them. Trees provide shade, and here on Ferry Street, you can see that this street is tree-lined. They even cool their surroundings through transpiration in the leaves, which is a process not too dissimilar from sweating. Trees release about 90% of the water they absorb through transpiration. For this week's at-home activity, I encourage you to become a citizen scientist by helping the City of Easton track extreme heat and provide critical information to help guide how the city addresses this climate hazard. We will provide a link where you can report observations related to heat. We want to know how the heat impacts you and how it varies around the city. Does it cool down at night? Did you experience a heat wave? Where do you go to cool down? Where is more shade needed? And so on. By reporting your experiences, you can help Easton become more resilient to the effects of climate change. Thank you for watching this week's video. Stay cool, and I'll see you next time.